What if I told you that being too intelligent might be the worst evolutionary choice in a society that values ignorance? Have you ever wondered why the most clear-minded people often end up lonely, misunderstood, or even persecuted? Imagine this scenario. An employee notices systemic flaws in a large company, tries to alert colleagues, and instead of receiving recognition, faces disdainful looks, social isolation, and in extreme cases, dismissal. This doesn't happen only in companies. It happens in families, on social media, in universities. Critical intelligence becomes uncomfortable. Wisdom, which should be a collective good, turns into a personal curse. Nietzsche already warned us, never give in to remorse. Because by revealing the truth, the wise person awakens the hatred of those who prefer to remain blind. It's as if the simple act of thinking were an offense. Here's what you should never forget. In a society where mediocrity is the common ground, any intellectual greatness is seen as a threat. All great things must remain outside the reach of common possession, he said. So, is the real problem with those who think too much? Or is the real disorder a culture that turns lucidity into exile? Now let's get to what really matters. Understanding why this curse happens, how it acts on your mind, in history, and in your daily life. The psychology behind the rejection of the wise. Nietzsche understood something most of us still hesitate to admit. Truth comes with a social price. When he wrote, "All great things must remain outside the reach of common possession," he wasn't just talking about works of art or scientific achievements. He was describing a profound human phenomenon, the collective tendency to reject what cannot be understood or controlled. Why is the wise person seen as a threat? Modern psychology has a clear answer: cognitive dissonance, a concept developed by Leon Festinger in 1957, after observing the behavior of followers of an apocalyptic cult who continued to believe in the end of the world even after several failed prophecy dates. The human brain hates internal contradictions. When confronted with a truth that threatens our deepest beliefs, we react with denial, anger, and often hostility toward the bearer of bad news. A 2010 study from the University of Michigan reinforces this dynamic. Researchers found that 61% of participants, when confronted with evidence contradicting their political opinions, not only ignored the data but became even more radical in their previous positions. The truth, far from setting them free, made them cling even more tightly to the lie. And what happens to the bearer of truth? They become the target. The messenger turns into the enemy. Nietzsche, in stating, "Never give in to remorse," was already warning us, by speaking what needs to be said, you will make enemies. And if afterward you regret telling the truth, you'll only be committing a second act of stupidity. Historically, the example of Socrates is emblematic. He wasn't condemned for theft or violence. He was condemned for questioning, for exposing contradictions, for forcing the city of Athens to look in the mirror. His crime? Making people think, and thinking, in that society as in many others, was an act of war. Today, modern Socrateses don't face hemlock but digital ostracism. Cancel culture is the contemporary version of public condemnation. University professors lose their positions. Journalists have their careers destroyed. Researchers are demonized for presenting inconvenient data. A 2021 study from Stanford University revealed that 43% of academics avoid publishing research that could generate public controversy, fearing retaliation. Think about social media. How many times have you seen someone presenting a solid argument that contradicts the dominant narrative, only to be attacked en masse? Likes and shares go to those who reinforce the consensus, never to those who challenge the collective comfort zone. When was the last time you, upon noticing a social lie being reinforced, chose to remain silent to avoid conflict? Ask yourself, how many times have you sacrificed your lucidity in the name of social acceptance? This is the psychology behind the rejection of the wise, a collective defense mechanism that prefers to kill the messenger rather than accept the message. Nietzsche knew this, and now so do you. Isolation as a consequence. Nietzsche was relentless in reminding us, wisdom makes men silent, stupidity makes them talkative. This is not just a bitter observation. It's an almost biological description of how the wise react to the hostile environment of an intellectually shallow society. Silence is not an aesthetic choice. It is a survival mechanism. But why does wisdom lead to isolation? Psychology offers a powerful explanation for this: the cognitive and emotional overload caused by exhausting social interactions. A study conducted in 2016 by the University of Singapore analyzed over 15,000 individuals and concluded that people with higher IQs reported lower satisfaction with frequent social interactions. The reason? Constant superficiality and the absence of genuine conversations. Another study, published in the British Journal of Psychology in 2016, was even more direct. The higher an individual's intelligence, the lower their need for socialization to achieve emotional well-being. The company of others, for the more lucid, often becomes a source of stress, not comfort. Nietzsche experienced this firsthand. His later years were marked by seclusion. The Swiss mountains became his refuge. His letters, increasingly scarce, reveal a man who no longer expected understanding from anyone. He distanced himself from old friends, like Wagner, and was considered insane by many. But perhaps his madness was simply the predictable result of decades spent trying to dialogue with those who refused to listen. In the modern world, the most visible version of this phenomenon is the so-called intellectual burnout on social media. People who were once active in debates end up deleting their accounts or disappearing from discussions. Not for lack of arguments, but due to emotional exhaustion. A survey conducted by the Pew Research Center in 2020 found that 64% of active social media users avoided posting political or critical opinions out of fear of attacks or cancellations. This isolation goes beyond the virtual world. How many times have you skipped a social gathering because you knew the conversation would be shallow, repetitive, or full of cliches? How often have you preferred a book, a solitary walk, or simply silence over subjecting yourself to hours of meaningless talk? Ask yourself, have you ever avoided a meeting with friends because you anticipated there would be no space for a real conversation? Have you ever felt the need to dumb yourself down just to fit into a group? The solitude of the wise is not a choice, it is a consequence. Nietzsche, by falling silent, made one final act of resistance, protecting his sanity. When the entire environment feeds on superficiality, silence becomes the last refuge of lucidity. Are you already feeling this in your own life? The illusion of intellectual equality. Nietzsche knew that one of the most dangerous traps in any society is believing that all opinions carry the same weight. His statement, "all great things must remain outside the reach of common possession," is a direct blow to this collective illusion, because the brutal truth is, not all ideas are equally valid, and not all voices carry the same degree of lucidity. Today, we live in what many call the culture of opinion equivalence, a phenomenon that cognitive psychology refers to as the false equivalence effect. In 1999, researchers David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger from Cornell University conducted an experiment that would become a landmark, the Dunning-Kruger effect. They discovered that the less a person knows about a given subject, the more confident they are in judging it. Meanwhile, true experts, aware of the topic's complexity, tend to underestimate their own competence. This inversion of competence and confidence creates a toxic environment for any attempt at rational dialogue. This is why, on social media, the loudest voice is rarely the most informed. A 2021 survey from the University of Cambridge revealed that content with less technical foundation is 3 times more likely to go viral than in-depth analyses. Historically, the example of Galileo Galilei is a classic case of this dynamic. Even with robust scientific evidence, Galileo was persecuted by the Inquisition for stating that the Earth revolved around the sun. The weight of institutionalized ignorance was so great that he had to publicly recant to save his own life. Today's modern Galileos are climate scientists, virologists, educators, or any other group challenging popular beliefs. Just recall the flood of conspiracy theories during the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of people began trusting a poorly edited YouTube video over decades of medical research. The problem is that the cult of opinion equality creates a social shield against critical thinking. Questioning this dynamic is seen as arrogance, the consequence, the silence of those who know, and the explosion of certainties among those who understand nothing. When was the last time you watched a public debate and noticed that the person who was more correct spoke with greater hesitation, while the most ignorant spoke with almost aggressive confidence? Ask yourself, how many times have you remained silent in the face of absurdity just to avoid being labeled elitist or arrogant? Nietzsche foresaw this dilemma. He knew that when everything becomes just an opinion and no one recognizes a hierarchy of knowledge, deep thought becomes an offense. Society chooses mediocrity not by accident but by self-defense. That's why true wisdom is rarely popular. It is solitary, uncomfortable, and profoundly necessary. The existential weight of lucidity. Nietzsche, in his provocative Lucidity, left us a silent warning with the phrase, "Never give in to remorse." He knew that the true torment of the wise is not just social isolation, but the existential burden that comes with expanded consciousness, seeing too much, understanding too much, feeling too much. All of this comes at a price. Modern psychology describes this phenomenon as existential cognitive overload. In a 2014 study from Yale University, researchers found that individuals with a high level of analytical thinking show a significantly higher incidence of existential anxiety. Knowing too much does not bring comfort, on the contrary. It opens doors to unanswerable questions, to insoluble anguish. While the ignorant can rest in certainty, the lucid live in a state of permanent questioning. A 2022 study from the University of Cambridge pointed out that people with higher IQs are 40% more likely to develop depressive disorders and anxiety crises. The world, for those who see its invisible layers, ceases to be a safe place. Historically, think of Franz Kafka. His works are labyrinths of anguish, bureaucracy, guilt, and alienation. Kafka was a man who saw beyond the surface of society, and this capacity for deep reading led him to a life of emotional suffering. His writing is not just literature. It is a clinical portrait of the pain experienced by those who see the invisible gears of oppression and systemic stupidity. Today, the weight of lucidity takes on more modern but equally painful forms. Scientists, investigative journalists, psychologists, teachers, all report a growing sense of helplessness in the face of the wave of misinformation, excessive simplification, and ideological polarization. A 2020 study by the American Psychological Association revealed that 67% of professionals in analytical fields report symptoms of burnout due to the socially hostile environment toward critical thinking. And you? How many times have you felt an existential void upon realizing that, no matter how hard you try, you can't change the mindset of the people around you? When was the last time a simple conversation left you exhausted because the level of superficiality was unbearable? Ask yourself, have you ever wished to be a little more ignorant just to be able to sleep peacefully? Nietzsche understood that the true curse of the wise is not being misunderstood by others, but being incapable of returning to the comfortable unconsciousness of ignorance. Once you see the gears behind the facade, there's no way to unsee. Lucidity is a one-way path. But here's what makes this truly disturbing. In recognizing this reality, you realize that you are alone in a sea of shallow certainties. The lingering question is, what to do with this awareness? The courage to keep thinking. Nietzsche knew that lucidity carries a high price, but he also left a legacy of resistance. His phrase "never give in to remorse," for remorse would mean adding a second act of stupidity to the first, echoes here as a call to intellectual courage. After everything we've seen, the isolation, the existential weight, the social rejection, the inevitable question is, how do we keep thinking when everything around us pushes us towards silence? The answer is harsh but necessary, with courage. Psychology calls this cognitive resilience, a concept studied by researchers at the University of Toronto in 2018. It shows how individuals with high openness to experience and critical thinking develop, over time, a kind of thicker emotional skin. They don't become insensitive, but they learn to accept discomfort as part of the process. The resilience of the wise doesn't come from denying the pain, but from the conscious acceptance that this is the price of seeing what others refuse to see. Historically, Hannah Arendt is an emblematic example of this intellectual courage. When she published Eichmann in Jerusalem, she was attacked from all sides. Her analysis of the banality of evil shocked the world by showing that most Nazi atrocities were committed not by monsters, but by ordinary people, following orders without thinking. Arendt paid a very high social price. She lost friends, was publicly vilified, but did not back down. She understood that silence in this case would be a crime. Today, journalists exposing authoritarian regimes, human rights activists, and even scientists challenging consensus are the new representatives of this courage. They face threats, persecution, censorship, and even so, they continue. But here's the crucial point: you are part of this too. Maybe you're not writing philosophical treatises, nor confronting governments, but every time you choose to question a popular idea, every time you challenge an empty speech, every time you refuse to accept ignorance as the standard, you are, in some way, sustaining the tradition of intellectual courage. Ask yourself, are you willing to pay the price of being lucid? How many times in recent months have you chosen the easier path just to avoid discomfort? And more importantly, how many truths have you swallowed just to preserve social peace? Nietzsche invites us not to give in to remorse. Don't blame yourself for being who you are. Don't apologize for seeing what others don't see. Don't soften your questions just because they are uncomfortable. The world doesn't need more comfortable voices. It needs more courageous minds. The choice between comfortable blindness and painful lucidity. Now that we've traveled this journey together through the curse of wisdom, perhaps the question echoing in your mind is, what now? What do I do with all this? You've seen that the price of lucidity is high. Nietzsche knew this when he wrote, "Never give in to remorse." He understood that the true punishment for those who think doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. It's the regret of having seen too much, felt too much, understood too much, and then wanting to go back. But there's no going back. Once you see, you can't unsee. So what's left for us? The first step is to recognize that your sense of alienation, social fatigue, and even melancholy are not personal flaws. They are symptoms of a system that penalizes intelligence, a system that, out of fear and self-preservation, chose mediocrity as its comfort zone. Psychology calls this normative conformity, the unconscious impulse to align with the group to avoid ostracism. A 2019 study from Columbia University showed that 72% of people prefer to stay silent in group discussions when their opinions contradict the majority, even when they know they're right. But here's the choice Nietzsche would place before you. Either you embrace the comfortable illusion, or you accept the burden of lucidity. With responsibility. So here's a practical challenge. Over the next 7 days, write down every situation where you notice a social lie being reinforced around you. It could be during a work conversation, in a WhatsApp group, in a social media post, or even at a family gathering. You don't need to react immediately, just take note. Then, at the end of the week, reflect. What was the real reason you stayed silent? Fear of rejection? Exhaustion? Conformism? This exercise will force you to confront your own participation in maintaining collective ignorance. And here's one last uncomfortable question to carry with you. How many times have you been complicit in collective silence just to protect yourself? If this text provoked you, made you think, or even left you a little uncomfortable, good, that was the goal. Share this content with someone who also needs this discomfort, someone who might be living the same silent dilemma as you. Let's keep this conversation going, because as long as there's at least one mind willing to think, lucidity still has a chance to survive. And you? Are you ready to choose the courage of lucidity?